Hello, I want to welcome you to our webinar. I want to thank you for joining our webinar. I'm actually very excited because this is a new webinar for our center and also for me. And I'm going to be sharing a lot of information that's new. And it's actually going to be very personal because we're going to be talking about something that everybody is experiencing right now, COVID, and all the anxiety and despair that is causing because of all the changes and the shutdown and the quarantines and not knowing what the rules are going to be tomorrow and if the schools are going to be open or not, or if we have to wear masks and just all the uncertainty. So, but I'm glad that you're joining us, and I'm going to be giving you a lot of hopefully very practical tips and tools that you can do on your own, but also sharing some very important information about what we've been doing, what I've been doing in my career for almost 40 years now, is helping people with anxiety and depression. And we also work with ADD and autism and Asperger's, but really doing this in a very holistic way. The other thing I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be sharing some very practical tips and tools, including some very spiritual and kind of religious aspects, because this is a time where it's very important to have some consistency in our life and something that we can depend on because everything else is changing. So we're going to be talking about that and working on that as we go along. Let me introduce myself. My name is Dr. Michael Linden, and I am the Director of Attention Learning Center. Our main office is in Orange County in Laguna Hills. I also have an office in Encinitas. And I was very fortunate. You'll kind of hear a little bit of my journey in a couple minutes, but I learned about this field in its infancy back in the 1980s when I was an undergraduate in University of Miami in Florida and learned about biofeedback in college. So it was very exciting to me to be in the ground floor. There was only a handful of people doing this in the world. Now there's thousands, and I've been very fortunate to train people not all over the country, but all over the world, and China and Australia and Europe and Israel that are using our techniques. And but we've continued to make a lot of progress and refine this. So this is just a little information on me about how I got started in this, and actually was certified in biofeedback and neurofeedback in 1984 and started to use this a year before that in 1983. So this might be new to some of you, but this is something that has been going on a long time. But I also wanted to share with you at the beginning so you understand why this is so important to me and why I continue to do this so long is, as most of us, you get involved in a field and it's because it's affected someone in your family or yourself. In this case, we'll talk about a little bit about both, but I kind of grew up in a family that had a lot of anxiety. I think almost everybody in my maternal side of my family had anxiety. My grandmother, I just remember they called her a worrywart. And my mother has a history of anxiety and sleep problems. My brother and sister, both, and they've also had some depression. I have cousins, nieces, and nephews. So it ran throughout my whole family. And it's a very common thing, as we'll talk about, especially in the last couple months. One of the reasons I learned these techniques that I'm going to talk about is I had to use them on myself. I was lucky because when I learned about them, I was in graduate school working to become a psychologist. But believe it or not, my first introduction to some of these techniques was when I was 13, when my mother was teaching yoga, and she taught me diaphragmatic or deep breathing that we still teach in conjunction with biofeedback. And I ended up using that. I used that in high school when I had to take tests, when I took the SATs, when I took the boards to get into graduate school, and even when I took my psychology licensing exam. And I realized how well it worked because when I did the breathing and I did the biofeedback, my scores could get higher. And recently they've done research at the University of San Francisco State, and they say students who do this type of biofeedback technique we're going to talk about, heart rate variability, their grades on math tests go up 2 full grades just from doing the techniques we're going to talk about. I've been certified in this since 1984 in biofeedback and stress management, and actually helped start the support group at Saddleback Church, the anxiety and depression support group that's still going on with lots of other people running it. The best way that I kind of use this, the most common way I use that now, is with public speaking. And you know how that goes when you have a topic you're going to talk about, it ends up affecting you the day you do a workshop or seminar on it. So I actually was doing this a lot today. I had a lot of anxiety because I have some new videos on here I haven't shared. And I was thinking, I'm going to have to present all this information for the first time. So I've been doing these last night and today, the breathing, listening to relaxing music, trying to kind of focus on the positive, staying in the relaxation zone. So I've used this a lot when I've had talks to do. I did a talk in China when I had an interpreter, and the air conditioning wasn't working. It was 100 degrees and I still had to speak. I did this in Israel when I had an interpreter, and we had hundreds of people in a room that held 20 people. And I had to sync my talk as somebody was typing in Hebrew. That was very, very new, but very rewarding. So I've had to do this a lot on my own. So let me share with you some of the recent information about COVID. And I know you probably hear a lot about it. That's one of the things I recommend, that if you listen to the news, you limit it to about 5 or 10 minutes. So one of the things that we know, there's always kind of been this health crisis in our country, which is really frustrating because we have probably the best technology in the world, but we don't have a healthcare system that people can agree on that covers basic things like preventative medicine. So these are some of the new statistics. It used to be about 1 out of 5 people were taking medications for things like anxiety and depression. This has increased 75% in the last 3 months. That's really amazing. Attention deficit disorder was with 1 out of 10 students. I'd say half of the parents I talked to with the students having to take classes remotely online have complained about this. We're going to have another webinar. Our next one on August 6th is going to be about students with ADD and anxiety starting back to school, however that's going to look. 1 out of 36 students has autism and Asperger's. Anxiety, the estimates has increased 50% in the last 3 to 4 months. I would say probably all of us have anxiety with all the changing rules and guidelines and fears with coronavirus right now. Depression has increased 40%. A lot of people are feeling very hopeless. Some people, a lot of you may have lost your jobs and you're on unemployment and you don't get your unemployment checks and you're about ready to have to move and you don't know what the future looks like and you may not be able to visit your loved ones because of the quarantine situation. You may not be able to visit your family members. It's can be a very difficult situation. So even though we have this technology, we know that at least 50% of this is undiagnosed. And a lot of people, even though now we do a lot of our services remotely, especially our first visits, a lot of people are kind of scared to get help. So one of the things I wanted to make sure we offered to everybody who's involved today is, we'll take some questions at the end, but any of you that would like, we're offering a free consultation with me, and we usually do those on Zoom or on the phone. And you can call our office anytime during this meeting, or you can go onto our website, which most of you registered, and there's a little link to do a free consultation. And I wanted to do this because I didn't want people to wait for help because we really need to kind of get control and learn these techniques. It's very important for us and our loved ones and our society and our families right now. One of the reasons there's so much uncertainty and anxiety is it's unclear what's going on. There's a lack of testing. We don't know who has it. We have to wait 2 weeks for results. We don't know if the people we interact have it. We don't know if you go out even to a store. So, and it's not an easy thing to tell. And things keep changing. So one of the things we're going to look at is not only what's happening, but what can we do about this? And in my opinion, we have a lot of missing pieces. And the missing pieces are because we don't have testing. We really need an individualized solution in testing for this. And then we do have tests for anxiety and depression. These can all be done remotely now. We also have tests. We're going to talk just a little bit about ADD and Asperger's, and there's a lot of information on our website, Linden Attention Learning Center. And we also have information, some recorded webinars we've done. So, but we have to do testing for anxiety. Does everyone has some nervousness, but if it's affecting your sleep or your physical health or your mental health, it's important to get testing. We have testing for stress management. We have testing for attention, but we really have to look at the brain and we have to assess how the brain is functioning. And we also have different tests for attention we're going to talk about. But one of the reasons there's a lot of failure is that we have a lot of misconceptions in our country. So I'm just talking about the failure, and a lot of it is due to the problems with testing and the lack of availability we have. So here at our centers, and we call this Linden Attention Learning Center, we have a systemized program. And that includes things we're going to talk about today: neurofeedback, which is training of brain waves, and biofeedback, which is for anxiety and stress management, and a new type of neurofeedback we have called direct neurofeedback for depression. And we're going to talk about how to put all these pieces together. And we also do different types of counseling and therapy to support people through the process and teach them new skills, which we're going to talk about today. And having a plan and sticking to it really leads to the best results. And that's part of what we're going to talk about, the consistency. So I'm going to give you one or two slides about what we learned over the years with ADD. We learned that there's different types of ADD. And we learned that this can be common with a child or adult. People don't outgrow it. But we learned if we needed to figure out the differences in order to help people get the best training. And taking one medicine for all these different types, the success rate's very low. It's less than 25%. But we learned that there's ways of helping and really identifying this. We also discovered about 20 years ago that we could see patterns in the brain related to Asperger's that were separate from autism. Asperger's is something that isn't talked about a lot anymore, but it has to do with very bright people who have a hard time expressing their feelings and connecting in relationships, but often do very well academically. We have a support group at Mariners Church for adults with ADD and Asperger's that meets monthly, and we kind of talk and we share about feelings. But Asperger's is very hard to pick up because people are very bright. It's not like autism where there's a language delay, so it's often missed by the schools. But this is really what I want to talk about today, anxiety. Sometimes we refer to that as worry and stress. And yes, I think there's a lot of this right now. It's pretty hard to be immune from this. We're human. It's more common if you have ADD and Asperger's, but it's very common now. So what does anxiety look like? What are symptoms? Sleep, insomnia, having a hard time sleeping, waking up and not being able to go back to sleep. GI and stomach issues are very, very common. Cardiac issues. Your heart rate goes fast. You think you're having a heart attack. Nowadays, you might think it's a symptom of COVID. That's one of the things that's been happening with people more is if you have physical symptoms, you might be afraid you're getting COVID, and it's something you want to take seriously nowadays. You have a hard time breathing. You get headaches. You're very tired. If you're a student, it affects your memory. It affects how you do on a test. If you have to stand up in front of a group and do a talk. If you're an athlete, we call this performance anxiety or choking. And sports are going to start back up again soon. And when we get to the playoffs, you see a lot of people make mistakes and make errors or a turnover. You can get a panic attack, which is an anxiety attack. You have fears. You start to sweat a lot. But it can even affect your mood. Things like irritability and being really impatient are signs of anxiety. Particularly now during the coronavirus situation, we have some different stressors, which most of us have never had to experience. We have a lot of unexpected, sudden situations with health. Should you wear a mask or not? I'm inside right now, so in an office by myself, but anytime I even go out in my waiting room, I'm wearing a mask. That's one of the things, but what is the current health situation? What is your current status with that? The information changes all the time. Just think about what we're learning about schools. Are they going to be open or not on time? Are you going to go back to school in the class? Are your kids going to go back to school in class? Are they going to have to wear masks? Are they going to be able to go there every day? Are they going to be online? The financial impact has been tremendously difficult. A lot of people, like I said, have lost their jobs. They can't pay their rent. They were going to retire. They can't retire now. It's a very difficult situation. And one of the stresses for our country and for a lot of people is, do you go back to work and you risk your health, or do you stay home and not work and not have enough money to pay for your health and to pay for things? So this is a really big dilemma that most of us have never had to deal with. We're quarantined with our family members. There are some advantages of that. You get to spend more time with them, especially if your kids are in college. But it can be very stressful if you're all together all the time in the same house and you're not used to that, especially with young adults who have moved away and come back. Our physical activity is reduced. Those of us like me, I went to the gym and I had a trainer. My gym's been closed for 4 months. I try to work out at home, but it's much harder to do. And we have reduced physical activity. Exercise is very important for stress management and mood regulation. But this is a big part of it. It's out of our control. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know if coronavirus is going to improve in the next month. We don't know if it's going to come back in the fall. There's a lot of things we don't know, and it's very hard to have very little or no control over this. And that's one of the big causes of what I call coronavirus anxiety. Some of the symptoms, like we talked about, they're phobias and breathing difficulties. What about, if any of you are like me, I never used Zoom. I didn't even know what Zoom was last year. Now I'm spending 5, 6, 7, 8 hours a day on Zoom. It's pretty exhausting to talk over the internet, to be able to look at this, to use your voice that way all the time. A lot of people are more irritable and impatient, but the other thing we're seeing is this kind of hopelessness. When is this going to be over? When are things going to go back to normal? When can I go see my family? When can I go back to church? When is it safe to do these things? So one of the things we've discovered in the last 20 years is we can look at the brain and we can tell if somebody has anxiety, and we can look at this to figure out how to treat it. Our future talks, and if you look on our website, this is called a brain map. This is a picture of your brain, and it's based on your brain waves. And if you look at the picture here, you see a little bump where the nose is on the top, and this is the left and right side of the brain. And each of these dots are where we put sensors and we record your EEG, your brain waves. Do we all have brain waves? Yes. If you didn't have brain waves, it wouldn't be good. You probably wouldn't be able to be on Zoom listening. You'd be in either a coma or not live. But when we get anxiety, our brain goes fast. And what this brain map shows is the red, which is if you have too much activity. If you look at the key here on the bottom, the red means there's too much of the activity, And in this right corner, there's too much of this fast activity. So when we see this, we know our goal is to help the brain and get the brain to be calmer. So how do we do that? We want to do this in a way that gets a good result, that doesn't get side effects, and that has a lasting result. And this is what we'll talk about, biofeedback and neurofeedback. Some of you are familiar with biofeedback. Believe it or not, it's been around since the 1960s. It was very popular for things like headaches and ulcers. My first job when I was 23 years old, I did biofeedback for stress management. I actually worked in a dentist office, and we did work on TMJ, which is when your muscles in your jaws get really tight. There's a new type of biofeedback we called heart rate variability. And I'm going to explain that. Heart rate variability shows us if your breathing rate or your heart rate and your respiration rate, if they're in sync. I'm going to show you an example of this in a minute. When they're in sync, you get the deepest type of relaxation possible. Heart rate variability has become very popular for athletes. In Europe, the World Cup soccer teams have been doing this for years. They actually have a room called a mind room, and they train their athletes just like they do weight training and physical training. In the Olympics, it's very common. Canada has had this type of training for their athletes for about 10 years. The Winter Olympics, that they were very successful. They had a program called Own the Podium, and all their athletes had access to this, and they were very successful. They actually won the most gold medals that year. Heart rate variability is very good for your health. It's very good for your sleep. There's another type of biofeedback we do for headaches, and we do this with kids. It helps you relax. It helps you release your muscle tension. If you have tension in your neck, if you get headaches, it's called EMG or muscle biofeedback. There's another type of biofeedback we do called temperature biofeedback. So a common reaction with people was when you get stressed out, your hands get cold. If that happens to you a lot, that can be a sign you're going to get a migraine headache. And you can learn by relaxing and doing biofeedback to warm your hands and prevent and get rid of your migraine headaches. Another common example, and this is more common with men, is people start to sweat a lot and they get panic attacks. And this is very common under pressure. So one of the things with the biofeedback is once we teach this to people, we recommend they do it twice a week, but you kind of have to get into a rhythm and a flow and a routine, which has been very hard in the type of environment we have now. So I'm going to show you what a biofeedback screen would look like. Let me describe this to you first. It's something that's very hard to demonstrate over a webinar, but what we have here is we put some kind of connections on your fingers, and then we measure your breathing rate around your stomach. And we have this measure here where you see this pacer, and you breathe in for 6 seconds and through your nose, and you breathe out through your mouth. And when you do this over and over again, you get your breathing rate and your heart rate in sync. And we call that heart rate variability. And then what we see below is we measure your muscle tension, if your muscles are tight, if your temperature of your hands is warm or cold, if your skin's perspiring. And what you do by learning different relaxation techniques, you learn to control this and regulate your emotions and regulate your brain and control anxiety and eventually prevent it when you practice it. So a screen may look something like this here. And I'm going to play this for you. I'm hoping the volume works on this. So you're breathing in through your nose. You're breathing out through your mouth. You're relaxing your muscle tension. You can do this with your eyes open, with your eyes closed. When you get relaxed, this screen shows a different image that keeps changing. It could be a video. It could be one of these display screens. But you're getting feedback every time you hear that music, and you see the screen changes, you're relaxing your brain-body connection. And as you get good at this helps you get in control of anxiety and stress and eventually prevent it. So this is what a screen looks like, and we sit and we explain this. We typically do 5 sessions of this in the office. We do have options after the first session or 2 to do it remotely. We've come up with options to do just about everything I'm going to talk to you about today remotely recently because there's been a need for that. But we are open and we have social distancing. We bring our clients in one at a time from the car and we walk you in. We all have masks and gloves and keep things very sanitized, have very special air filters that catch all the potential germs. So in a very safe, clean environment here. So this is the biofeedback, and this part of it on the little pacer is called heart rate variability. So what I also want to give you is some tips and tools of what you can do on your own. And this is kind of a new list, so I want to go through these and explain these to you. So one of the most important things we have to try to do is stay in the present. What that means is you're in the moment. You're not worried about what just happened. You're not worrying about what's going to happen. Athletes call this being in the flow or being in the zone. I have a diagram that I use with my clients, and it has this timeline. And it talks about getting stuck in the past and being depressed or being over-focused on the future and worried. But in reality, the only thing we can control is what's going on right now here in the present. And when you learn that, it's kind of comforting because you know that if you do things in the present, it's going to help your future. So, and why do I say that? Because problems in life are unpredictable. And they really happen every day. And it's really good to expect them, especially in this environment now with COVID, where everything is different and you can't get a hold of people on the phone. And even something like getting a delivery or getting someone to deliver something to your house or just going to the grocery store is different than it used to be. So expect these to happen. And when they happen, say, okay, this is one of the problems I was going to have today. I'm expecting them, so I'm not going to let it get me stressed out. Limit your exposure to media. The media is really important because you need to know what's going on, but it's a lot of confusion, a lot of negative statistics about how many people have COVID and the hospitals are overcrowded and this is happening and they disagree with this. And it gets to the point where it's overwhelming and it really comes down to what can you do now? If you can't control that, you have to be able to limit that and do healthy things for your brain. Aerobic exercise is extremely important. If you don't have any exercise equipment at home, walking outside with a mask on nowadays, aerobic, running, exercising. I play tennis. Unfortunately, my tennis courts are still open. And if any of you are tennis players, my friends and I use separate tennis balls each game, and we each have our own tennis ball, so we don't have to touch the other tennis balls. But one of the most important things that I've learned over my life, and mostly recently, is it's really important to be able to pray for things that are out of our control. Because there's so much out of our control now, it's very important to do that. And doing that can give you a sense of hope. I've been a member and worked at different support groups of Saddleback Church for almost 28 years now. And Rick Warren is really amazing in how he integrates this and uses this and connects this in some of his messages. Some of us know the saying, this too shall pass. One of Rick Warren's favorite sayings is replace your panic with prayer. And you know, when you pray, you relax and you feel like things that you can't control, you don't have to control anymore, and you give your anxiety to God. Stay in contact with your family members and friends. Now, again, this is harder to do than it used to, but you can do it on the phone. You can do it through FaceTime. You can do it through Zoom. You can do it in very small groups, safely if you wear a mask outside. That's really important. You don't want to be isolated right now. You might be physically isolated, but you don't want to be emotionally isolated. Having humor is very important for managing stress. A matter of fact, having humor is very important right now. Watching a very funny comedy movie or something on YouTube, something to get your mind off of all the negative, stressful things that are going on. It's very important to be able to do that. What else can you do? Singing is very, very healthy and very good to do when you're anxious. It could be something like the Eagles were on TV a couple weeks ago, if any of you are Eagles fans, and just watching that and listening to all their music was very relaxing. But particularly spiritual music is very good to do, because when you're doing that, and that's called worship, it really clears your mind. And one of Rick Warren's sayings that I like a lot is replace worry with worship. And when you're worshiping and you're singing a positive song and you're getting kind of close with God, it does help your anxiety go away. I've made a habit of doing this during COVID twice a day, every morning when I'm getting ready for work, and every night before I go to sleep, I do this, and I have different songs preset on Alexa, and I have some to help me relax and some to help me feel more positive, that things are going to go okay and I'm not in control. But music is very important to do, and you can do this in your car, you can do this on your phone. Keeping a lot of structure and predictability is very important, because a lot of our structure is gone now. If you're working from home, if your kids are home, going to school on the internet, our structure is gone. So we want to keep in structure. We want to have routines that you still exercise at a certain time. You still get up at a certain time. That's very important to do. Doing this relaxing breathing is very important to try to do every day, at least a couple times. Slow your breathing. One way to think about it is you stop, take a deep breath into your nose, a deep breath out through your mouth, and you rethink. And you rethink. If you're thinking about something negative, think about something else, especially if it's something out of your control, which most things are. So these are some of our management tools. So one of the things that in the Bible verses, they talk about this a lot. And one of the most well-known Bible verses is from Psalms. And I think is very relevant now. And even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. So one of the things that's nice to know is that you're not alone. Even if you feel alone, even if you are physically alone, you're not alone. And it's important to have that sense that you're not alone and God is with you all the time. It just gives you a lot of hope. The other thing that we've learned, and this is something as psychologists we know, is when you go through troubles, you grow. Valleys of trouble lead to growth. Joel Osteen, who's another pastor who has a lot of kind of positive messages, talks about troubles are a gateway of blessings, and they lead to victory. You might be in a valley now, but you're going to come out of it, and you will accomplish your dreams and fulfill your destiny. I'm in a small group once a week, and one of the things we talk about is what blessings, what positive things have come out of this terrible time that we're in. And there are positive things that have happened to a lot of people, spending more time with your family. Maybe you've had time to think about you want to change careers. You've thought about what's really important to you. You've thought about your health more. The other thing that we know as groups of people is there's a lot of vulnerability right now. But vulnerability leads us to growth. And it's hard. And growth is also vulnerability, binds us together, because right now our whole world is in this pandemic together. There's no one that's not affected. There's no country, there's no people, there's no race, and we're really all in this together. And that's a really important thing to realize, this, how we can help each other through this, even simply by wearing masks. So these are some of that we call taking a valley and following it to victory. So I'm going to switch gears and talk about the other topic for today, which is about depression and sadness and despair. It's not the most popular thing to talk about, but it goes hand in hand with anxiety. And this is something that's extremely increased in the last couple months. One of the things we know is that depression or sadness or hopelessness is very common. And it also interferes with sleep. And you feel very tired all the time. You can feel very sad. It affects your motivation. If you have to get up and go to school or work online, if you've lost your job and you're trying to find a new job, it affects a lot of different things with you. It affects your weight. A lot of people have gained weight when you get depressed and also from being quarantined. One of the sayings they have now is the quarantine 15, about how most people have gained 15 pounds because they're quarantined. But it also leads to a lot of negative thoughts. A negative thought that you're going to get sick with COVID. A negative thought that you're not going to get out of your financial bind. You're not going to find a good job. Things aren't going to get better. This is never going to end. And those thoughts are very human to have, but they're obviously not productive, and they can really lead to a lot of hopelessness and depression. When we look at our brain maps, again, this is like that speed of your brain. We see if someone has depression that it shows up at a different location. And with the neurofeedback, we can actually improve this activity so someone feels less depressed, just like we can decrease the fast activity if someone's anxious. Another test we do to measure anxiety and depression is called the MMPI, the big name Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Test. And we do this a lot online now. But it measures the levels of depression and anxiety. These peaks here are of an adult that had depression and anxiety, which is very common together. It also measures things like PTSD, which has gotten a lot worse, post-traumatic stress disorder, because of all the terrible things going on. And unfortunately, as predicted, this is going to increase tremendously over the next year as just a result of all the things that are happening, especially if you don't use these techniques to kind of handle your anxiety in the moment. What does the direct neurofeedback look like? Direct neurofeedback is a little different than our regular neurofeedback. What it does is it has an ability to stimulate your brain. So what happens is when we stimulate your brain, usually if someone is depressed, their brain is going slower. So what was developed only a couple years ago was a way by activating certain parts of the brain by putting sensors in different parts on the scalp, not in the head, on top of the head. It has a very low pulse electrical stimulation, and it activates the brain, and it dramatically helps depression and dementia and head injuries, which slow the brain. So I'm going to try to show you a video of what it's like. This is what our kind of a picture of our brain, the setup is. This is the nose and the ears, and each of these kind of black dots shows where we put one of the sensors. What our equipment does is it monitors the speed of your brain, and wherever your brain is slow, it activates your brain, and you just have to sit there and sit still, and it might look something like this. And basically what it does is it activates your brain and helps it get unstuck. And our brain often, if we're not feeling good or we're anxious or depressed, it gets stuck at the wrong speed. So what this does is it activates the brain, and it kind of puts a little bit of the stimulation, and it gets your brain to a healthy, calm speed. So let's see if I can play this for you here. And there's really no sound to this. And what you see is right now, these peaks mean the brain waves are too slow. And by activating the brain, these peaks move to a faster speed, and you feel more alert and awake and motivated and less depressed. It's a little hard to show you without kind of experiencing it, but it's one of the newer developments. It's called direct neurofeedback, or the fancy name is called ultra low pulse electrical stimulation. And there's been a lot of research in the last 10 years that has shown this not only helps depression, but it helps dementia and head injuries. This is we did a study of football players in the National Football League that were retired, that were getting dementia. And all these red and blue lines here show areas of the brain that were either over-connected or under-connected. And after the neurofeedback, and 3 months later, these areas had normalized. And when the areas normalized, what happened is people's physical functioning were better. So this is a group before and after they did the direct neurofeedback. Their physical functioning was better. Their pain was better. They had less fatigue. Their emotional well-being was better. Their social functioning was better. Their health was better. So these are some of the things that can happen when your brain is working at the right speed and is functioning better. This is what we do with the direct neurofeedback. So what are some things you can do if you really are feeling hopeless and despair? These are some of the management tips that we talk about, and I teach these in our office, and this is what I work with people on. We do this in biofeedback and neurofeedback. And for those of us who joined late, if you want to have a talk with me and talk more about this, we're setting up kind of individual meetings, because for privacy's sake, we can't really do that over the phone or internet anymore, especially over the internet. So here's some tips for that. As we talked about before, stay in the present. Don't regret what happened in the past. We've all made mistakes. We've all had difficult relationships. Being able to kind of stay in the present and let that go, or even forgive people, is a really valuable tool. Some of the things we talk about are the same for anxiety. You want to have a lot of exercise. One of the mindsets we talk to people about are problems have purpose. I talked about that earlier. They lead us to growth, and we develop endurance or perseverance. And you know what? We all need this right now. We have to have a lot of endurance and perseverance to get through COVID right now, because we don't know how long it's going to be. A lot of the same tips that we talked about for anxiety are important: worshiping, singing. One of the most important things that I like to recommend to people, and I personally do this at Saddleback and Mariners Church, and a lot of my family members do this too at food pantries or through support groups, is help people that are worse off than you. One of the things that does is obviously it helps people, and a lot of people need food and need companionship now, but it takes the focus off of your problems, and it helps you realize that, you know what, we might have it hard, but a lot of people have it worse. One of my favorite sayings that Rick Warren's used over the years is he's talked about that most people in the world would die to have our problems. This was, maybe not the best wording during COVID, but most of them are going to die, and they're not going to have food. They're not going to have a house. So if we're helping other people, that's a very important thing to do. Plus, obviously, it helps the people that we're helping, because they need help and they need a purpose. And sometimes the people we help during a difficult situation like this, it changes their lives and our lives. And that's one of the purposes in this. So these are some tips you can do. One of the things I like to tell people is we have control over our attitude. Even if we don't have control over COVID, we have control over our attitude. In graduate school, I read a book called The Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, who was in the concentration camps in Germany. And he talked about how his attitude is what helped him survive. So we know that this is a quote about attitude, and it says, one of the greatest discoveries on earth is that a person can change their future by simply changing their attitude. It's one of the only things that no one else can take away from us. Another speaker I heard came up with an acronym for this called YAHOO, which is you always have options. we do have choices. And one of the choices we have is to have a positive attitude. It's not easy to do, but we can choose that. And that's what Kay Warren, also at Saddleback Church, talked about this too, is that if happiness and joy are a choice, the level of joy you experience is completely and totally up to the level you choose to experience. And it's independent of our life events or circumstances. Wow, think about that. Think about if you could do that and be able to do this more and choose to be happy and choose to be joyful, even in all the problems that are going on right now. One of my favorite Bible verses, and I also run support groups at Saddleback Church, and we talk about this sometimes at the end, is my favorite Bible verse from James, and it's, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, when you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work, so you might be mature and complete." Well, we're all trying to be more mature and complete, and that perseverance really comes in handy right now. Rejoice in the problems, not for the problems, but in the problems, and persevere, because we know that God can bring good out of bad. And one of the things we talked about in our small group this week is the good things that have happened out of this terrible, bad, negative coronavirus situation over the last couple months. It might be connecting with family or friends, or just kind of realizing what's more important. It might be getting kind of in touch with things you haven't got in touch with before, or getting more spiritual. All the things we talked about today, we can do remotely. We can do biofeedback and neurofeedback remotely. We usually have to have a couple visits in the office first, but when COVID started, we very quickly developed ways to do this over the internet. We still have to have a couple initial visits, and we can hook equipment up to your computers, and we can guide you through this remotely, because for safety's sake, some people prefer not to come in, even though we've been open as an essential practice this whole time, just helping a lot of people with anxiety and seizures and autism and ADD. And when we do this, we just do some testing and retesting in the office, and we have our meetings over Zoom or over the phone. So when I used to do these talks, I would talk about, okay, let's come up with a treatment plan. But I use the word action plan now. An action plan means you want to work on your goals, but you want to take action on it. And you know what? The best time to do that is now. One of the opportunities that's happened because of the COVID situation is most of us have more free time. We don't have activities. Unfortunately, we don't have activities we want to do. We have more time at home, where the students are not going to school. And that advantage means there's more time to work on your health, and work on anxiety, and work on depression. So we usually have 3 goals when we talk to people. The first is coming up with an accurate diagnosis. Anxiety and depression, a lot of the people we work with, from kids that are 4 through adults at any age, also have ADD, attention deficit disorder, autism, Asperger's, concussions, sometimes bipolar. We talked about today and how about biofeedback, and different types of neurofeedback are very successful. One of the advantages is they do not have side effects if they've done the right way, and they can reduce or eliminate medications. And they can lead to long-term solutions, which is really our ultimate goal, is to have a long-term solution. As I talked about at the beginning, prescriptions of anxiety and depression and sleep medications have increased 75% over the last couple of months because of COVID. And you know what? Those are temporary. They're not going to help in the long term. So one of the things I want to encourage those of you to do, if you need some help, is don't wait. Get some help now. Take charge. Make that decision here in the present to get help. Well, thank you for participating, and I think I'm going to kind of close out the meeting.
Sure.
But I just want to wish all of you blessings and peace and joy. And we're here to help you. If any of you have questions or want to talk with us, just give us a call or go on our website. We do have webinars now every month, and our support groups for adults with ADD and Asperger's, and also for parents and adults with ADD that we were running at Saddleback and Mariners Church, and now all virtual. And all those schedules are available. They're kind of getting updated on our website. So I just wish you all blessings, and God bless everyone, and stay safe, and we'll talk to you soon.